Enthusiastic greeting. I want to also talk a little bit about the title clause of this bill, because we were advised earlier on by Louise Upston when she was speaking in the second reading, I think it was, that we weren't focusing enough on the importance of some of the provisions in this bill, and I have to say that putting some of these things under the heading miscellaneous provisions probably doesn't actually adequately reflect the importance of what we're doing here, particularly I think the clause that increases the repayment rate, deduction rate, from 10 cents to 15 cents. I think that's actually potentially a very serious thing for those people who will end up having to pay that additional rate, and so I wouldn't necessarily see that as a miscellaneous provision. But I think it would be better for us to actually look at the reality of the bill and then work out what it should be called. And given the environment that we've already discussed recently with Stephen Joyce coming in as the Tertiary Education Minister, and knowing that Mr Joyce has told us already that this support for the interest-free student loan scheme by the national government is a political call. Nothing to do with principle, nothing to do with what we think is good for education in New Zealand, nothing to do with what we think is right for the economy of New Zealand to ensure that our graduates stay here, that people stay and contribute to the economy rather than go overseas. Nothing about that, straight out political call. So therefore, Mr Chair, I think this bill could aptly be renamed the Student Loan Scheme Exemptions and Miscellaneous Provisions Political Call Bill, because that's what's going on here. The National Party don't want us to really focus on the fact that Stephen Joyce has taken over this portfolio with a clear instruction from John Key to take a look at it, to take a look at tightening up eligibility for student support, because we know that's what Mr Key said in his statement to Parliament in early February this year. He said that this was going to happen, that people who perhaps spent too long in tertiary study were going to have to look at some restrictions on their eligibility for student support. Perhaps there would be something around whether people were passing courses sufficiently quickly. On this side of the House, we're concerned about those potential developments, and we see a bill in front of us now that is doing some reasonably important but minor changes, and they are useful. But at the same time, we're facing a situation where the government is only hanging on to its belief in interest-free student loans because it's a political call, not because it's a good idea, not because it's delivering to New Zealand, and therefore I think the bill could easily be retitled in that way. Perhaps another title, though, that would pick up the overall essence of the government's policy around interest-free student loans would be to call the bill the Student Loan Scheme Missing Bones Bill. Now, this may be confusing for some people who haven't been following the story so far, but when Labour introduced interest-free student loans in 2005, John Key was then the finance spokesperson for the National Party, and he stood in this House and said that this interest-free student loan policy that Labour was bringing in was ridiculous and that it would be opposed by the National Party with every bone in their body. Well, here we are in 2010, and following on from the 2008 election where the political call that Stephen Joyce has mentioned was made, we don't see much in the way of every bone being used. In fact, the bones are missing. There is, in fact, no attempt by the National Party to turn this around because politically they know they can't, but they're not committed to it. And in the long term, we know that National would rather roll back the interest-free student loan scheme, and the introduction of Stephen Joyce as the Minister of Tertiary Education, Mr Chair, is a clear sign that the National Party want to get at interest-free student loans. They want to restrict the number of people who can take out student loans and restrict the ability of people to take them out over a period of time. We believe that is a very dangerous path to go down. There is nothing more important as we come out of the recession than having people increase their skills so that they can contribute to the economy. And earlier in the debate, Mr Chair, I mentioned the fact that in Australia, in response to the recession, the Australian government moved quickly to ensure that people who lost their jobs had access to tertiary to training and tertiary study. They made sure that there were incentives for them to be able to do that so that they could contribute to the economy when Australia came out of recession. In New Zealand, we saw none of that. In New Zealand, we saw a continuation of the cap that sees tertiary institutions turning people away, particularly at the polytechnic level, faced with budget cuts from the national government in the polytechnics, and therefore we are not actually seeing New Zealanders trained and upskilled to be able to contribute to the economy as we come out of recession. That is a great shame, Mr Chair, and this bill and the activity of the national government around tertiary education could be so much more. We could be sitting here today working out how we could be increasing the skill level of New Zealanders, but unfortunately we're not, and this bill is misnamed. It is actually about the National Party wishing us to look elsewhere.